and welcome to the Best Advice Podcast. My wonderful guest today is Jenn Fisher. She's she's a blogger, author, traveler, overcomer. She's actually so inspiring. I cannot wait for you to hear her story. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So you do so much, right? Um, how would you like to first explain like what you do to the audience? Like,
My story. Okay. So, I kind of fell into solo traveling accidentally. It was kind of I think of like the accidental tours. I never even got a passport until I was in my 40s. But due to a lot of circumstances in my life, overcoming trauma and realizing first that solo hiking was a really therapeutic healing way for me to heal. I then moved on to bigger trips, hikes that were further away. And during that time of my life, I realized that I was healing. I didn't know that hiking was healing. It reminds me of that movie Wild, if you've seen that. And she goes through I think it's the Pacific Coast Trail. And is very similar to that. Like for me, moving my body and getting into nature helped me work out a lot of things that were going on in my head. And, slowly it led to taking my very first solo trip a couple of years later. I would have to say that, it was somewhat chronological. Leaving a loving but very codependent marriage devastated me, but it was taking the lid off of what was a lot of buried trauma, when I left that marriage. So a lot of that codependency like was now exposed. So that's when all the pieces were just, I don't know, there's a saying that says like, sometimes you need to like take it apart, like to the pieces to go back together in the right places. So yeah, I kind of like blew up my life. And then I walked through that. It was a very ripping the Band-Aid off,
yeah,
and then bleeding out for a couple of years and then healing myself, so it was a process of realizing like I had the power to heal myself, and also using therapy here and there, and then ultimately ending to where I am now, which is solo traveling and blogging about my solo travels and sharing honestly, authentically, and transparently about my history, overcoming trauma, and using lots and lots and lots of methods to do so. My goal is to help other women and any trauma survivor really to learn the power of healing is in their hands. Also, to understand that you may have experienced trauma, but you're not broken. You're whole, and you have the power to change your behavior, and change your life. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time, but it can be done.
I love that. How did you know? Because I know sometimes things happen and you never know why they happened, right? Or you look back in retrospect and you're like, oh, that's why I made that step or made that, took that action. How did you know to start trying to hike? Like, what did you feel? How did you get pushed into? How did you get called to do that? And then it ended up being like so therapeutic for you.
Well, I love how you kind of like read my mind a little bit, where like you look back, it's like they say hindsight is 2020 vision, like it all seems so clear now, but at the time it was just like, this invisible thread that I was following. And it does, it all perfectly aligns when I look back, so did I know it then? No, but I was listening to like a still small voice. I do a lot of inner child work as well. And
Hey there, feel like something's holding you back from your best life? What if you could discover your secret weapon for personal growth in less than 5 minutes? Introducing the Discover Your Personal Growth Superpower Quiz. It's your key to unlocking hidden strengths, identifying your unique motivators, and supercharging your success. Are you a determined overcomer, a purposeful planner, or maybe an authentic explorer? Don't let another day slip by feeling unfulfilled. Head to angelawadley.com and take the quiz. Don't be the only one who doesn't know their superpower. Discover it now.
Getting into the forest was a long lost dream of mine from childhood. So we lived in a very urban, poverty, dysfunctional city. That was like the first 7 years of my life mapping was that setting.
Mm.
But thank God my parents like to camp. So we would drive like an hour out of the city and off-grid camp because, it was the 70s and well, I was just a little kid, but my parents just wanted to let loose, They were out there with their friends partying and listening to Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and smoking and drinking. And,
Yeah.
all I knew was that when I was in those settings out of the city, there was a calm, there was a peace, there was a beauty, there was a soothing of my soul.
Oh, wow.
And I really fell in love with nature. And, sometimes I've thought about it, like, well, does that mean that though like I've asked myself this over the years, like, well, did I just get this fantasy part of my life that we went there and then it was okay, but we would go back to the city and it wasn't? I was like, no, I don't think so, because there was really traumatic things that happened when we were camping too. So, it was when I would be alone and I would be one-on-one, like looking at the sparkles on the water, with the sun flecks, and that came back to me, that came back to me hiking. I was quiet, it was still, and that's when I started to hear my inner child's voice. Like I heard that little small, like, hey, we really like this. Like I remember this. And when in my 20s and 30s and then raising kids, I hiked, but it was a completely different experience. It could have been the very same trail, but hiking by myself was a completely different experience. Everything could be heard and felt in ways that were brand new to me. And that brought up a lot of clarity and a lot of understanding. Um, well, I guess what I started to understand was that I don't hate myself. There's lovable things about me and there's lovable things about life. I just need to, um, you know, get to know me. And that's what happened hiking.
Yeah. So you also have, call yourself an overcomer, which is clear. What is you think the biggest thing you've overcome?
You know, it sounds so small, but it's so powerful. Hating myself.
Mm.
I overcame hating myself. I didn't understand that I hated myself. I didn't understand that some of the things that I experienced, abandonment, neglect, and childhood and abuse, I didn't understand that I internalized it to such an extent that it was now part of me. It was who I was. Like some of those parts inside of me only knew how to think and feel in through those, like in those terms and through those channels, it's just what I knew what life was. It's what love was. It was my relationship with myself, like, you know, um, unfortunately or fortunately, because here I am now. So who's to say? I don't want to judge myself, but for whatever reason, that's the relationship that I developed with myself. And certain behaviors, certain, you know, um, patterns of thought became a little more obvious to me that weren't working. And as a result, in time, I did a lot of crying. I did a lot of crying, because there was a lot of grief. There was a lot of pain that had to be let go through the tears. So I didn't usually cry when I would hike, but that's how I began to love myself. Because I don't know about your listeners, but for me, there was the internal voice. The most painful internalized voice was that I did something wrong, and that's why I got abused or abandoned or neglected. And I am unlovable, you know. So that had to be all cried out, you know, and let go of that. It's not true. You're not unlovable, you know.
I think that's so, so powerful because a lot of times people don't even, when people go through things like that, they don't even realize that they feel that way about themselves. They're just, continuing to look externally. And it's like you look externally at these people who like inflicted this, and that's not going to heal you. That's not going to help you. So I think that's so powerful what you just said. And crying is, a lot of people think crying is something to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's actually cathartic. It
It
can
really,
actually help you.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's amazing. And also, I don't know if you saw this angle of it, but the fact that you solo hike, I think there are a lot of people who'd be like, oh my God, wouldn't you be too afraid to do that? So you have an inner courage and a strength that I think is admirable. I don't know if anybody's pointed that out to you today, but I think that's really cool. I think it's really
Thank
cool.
you. That just makes my whole, everything light up. Thanks. That's so warm and smiley and kind.
Oh, you're so welcome. So I wanted to ask you a question. How did you how did you address like abandonment and grief and things like that through your travels? Like how did you, because most people just go and they go to tourist spots and they just go like hang out, but you did something different with it. You like made it medicine.
I did. Um, so it probably was born from just a very passionate, determined, I'm a very determined, stubborn person to heal myself. But it also was like reclaiming my inner child because so on my website is jennfisherbooks.com. I don't just write about the big, grand places that I go. I also write about like traveling to your hometown to heal. And when I was just hiking, it would be, an hour away, 2 hours away. It was hikes that I knew in forests. I'm from New Jersey and I love the Pine Barrens. I love the Pine Barrens, the pitch pines, the humidity, the bugs. It's where I'm from, and it's where my inner child learned to fall in love with nature. So, I wanted to return to those places because there was something about it that made me feel good. There was something about it that, reminded me of those connections that I made to myself and to nature, and to the universe, loving universe, when I was very small. So, you know, um, so those solo hikes were pretty much born from that. But then, there were other times when some of the grief of the divorce was surrounding traveling. So the way that I can explain that is that I thought I could take like a spiritual bypass and just like, oh, I'm going to go there again and like it's going to undo, and that didn't really work. Sometimes it would remind me, but like it wasn't that easy. Like that wasn't the ingredients of the recipe, when I would go somewhere because it gave me a good feeling on the inside, then I was following those breadcrumbs and I was following my healing path. But if I was trying to just recreate something, you know it didn't really go as well, so I learned that it would be a little bit better to go to places I'd never gone to with my family, and my ex-husband. I think I answered both parts of that. Did I? I'm not sure.
You did.
Okay.
You did. So how was anybody telling you, no, don't do that. You shouldn't do that by yourself. You're a woman. Did anybody say any of that to you?
If they did, Angela, I didn't listen.
I love it.
Yeah, I didn't listen. And I became pretty good at self-care and boundaries at a certain point where I just knew who was safe and who wasn't. And actually, I do post a lot about on mostly on my blog, not too much on social media, because I don't want to overstep boundaries. Everybody's different. But if you're coming to my blog to learn how to solo travel and overcome these difficulties, I want to teach you how. And the way that one of the biggest things is to like you get a mentor and or a support system. You know, I had both. I had a mentor that, you know, she was a mom and when I started doing certain things, my kids were still younger, now they're adults, but you know, she believed in me. She's like, you got this. I was like, okay, if you say so. Like, you know, I have enough trust in our friendship that you wouldn't send me to the wolves. So she's like, you got this. And she was right there. If I had any questions, I could ask her because, you know, some of it was around camping. Those were my first, you know, like excursions. And there were places that she had been. So she kind of like paved the way for me a little bit. And then I had one or two friends that were just like phenomenal, fantastic, like applause. I am so, you know, inspired by you. And those are the people that I spend, you know, my time around. And I've learned that as time has gone on, you know, people are really willing to lift you up, you know. And if they're not, I'm gonna say they're probably not, you know, they're not good for you. You know, don't listen to them. And I mean, if you've done your do your homework, do all of your due diligence, and then live your life.
Yeah, that's great advice in so many areas. Like who you're surrounded by is so impactful. And I think a lot of people do not realize that. You internalize things, even if it's not verbal, you internalize people's intentions for you. You internalize, you know, translating their actions, all kinds of things. So it's so important to be surrounded by people who are good for you. They're actually good for you.
Yeah, and again, it's like your self-trust. You
Yeah.
know, that's a big, big thing. If you've had trauma, if you've had difficult things, probably your trust was severed, you know, early. And, you know, I know for me, I learned how to mistrust myself, you know, or distrust. Like, I didn't learn to trust myself. I learned to not trust myself. And so, like, I think that's really powerful along the way to learn how to listen to your own voice and, you know, consciously say, well, you know, I'm walking away from that because I come first and I know what I need. And that's the whole, you know, it's just like one shade of self-trust. But I do feel strongly about, you know, if you really want the life that you desire, you have to build that strength, like internal strength.
Yeah. I do, and I agree with you. I do believe everybody has that little voice. Sometimes, you know, there's so much noise around that you don't hear it, or sometimes you hear it and you don't pay attention to it because you just, you know, are compelled to do something else, like by what you see or what you're surrounded by. But everybody you can use different ways to, you know, clear things out and become quiet enough and still enough to hear that. You use your solo hikes. You know, people sometimes use, you know, meditation or yoga or even sleep. Even sleep, you can get like, you know, I call them downloads, but you can get like, you know, inspiration from your inner voice and guidance. And it's so important. So I'm so glad you even mentioned that. So
I'm glad that you mentioned it too, because I really do relate to being able to hear my own voice when I'm alone. You know, like it's just too many distractions on a daily basis, you know, and the more time that I spend in quiet, like, you know, grounding, the louder that internal voice gets. And
yeah,
that's a great thing.
yeah. There's also like a negative, I think there's also like a stigma attached to being alone, right? Where
Totally agree.
people avoid it because it seems like it's a bad thing. And it's not.
Well, we are like-minded souls. I totally agree with you. And I even have an entire post on it. I was like, some people aren't going to agree with me. You know, I get it. Isolating gets a bad rap, but it is not all bad. And you know, I totally put it out there. I'm like, if you're a reader, maybe you need to hear it because, you know, we are the minority voice that, you know, being alone is healing or however, I'm all about it. I'm like, if you can't spend time alone for all whatever reasons, yeah, there's a lot that, because I know for me, I could not spend time alone. Could not, and I could like I could easily dip into like isolating, in a way that's not healthy. But we can't just, go through the black and white extremes. Like there's a healthy balance. And sometimes I think that the negative gets all the press, and I'm totally like there's a sacred solitude to being alone.
Yeah, I agree. So, as far as being an overcomer, what responses do you typically get when you say you're an overcomer?
I think people are intrigued. I do. I think people, want to know, well, what does that mean? Or what does that look like? And, I mostly feel that I overcame, if you want to call it the dysfunctional cycle, if you want to call it generational trauma, if you want to call it self-hate, I think that I live a very victorious life. I always wanted to be a writer and now I am. I mean, always wanted to be a writer. Really believed I was a hack,
Wow.
and wouldn't even say that out loud. And now I have like thousands of readers and I'm on my second book. Um, and that was just self-doubt, So yeah, overcome self-doubt. And then on the other hand, it's like the solo traveling. I I I couldn't even manage my own like paycheck because I was so afraid of finances. I was afraid of responsibility. And I was still married. The money just went into the account. I would have to ask my husband, for details because I was just so terrified. And now I have multiple investments. I have, multiple assets to my portfolio, and that feels really good. So it depends on what you want to, for my definition of overcoming, it's spiritual and emotional, and mental. I'm not going to ever downplay mental, like the chains of mental obsessions and compulsions, you
Mhm.
know. So I think that's, what my definitions are.
So you have to tell the audience the name of this amazing book.
Oh, it's called Roots and Wings, and it goes by the subtitle Finding Freedom Through Nature and Travel. Okay. So, it's a lot. uh, It's a short book, but it's a lot focused on from what we just discussed, leaving the marriage, and then what, like everything just exploded in my life. And then I wanted to capture people's value of time and keep it brief. I wanted to keep it like a blog post. There are 13 methods that I use, tried and true. One of them was somewhat traditional therapy. My therapist was there and she held space for me, and I love her dearly. She and I did amazing work together, but I moved the mountain. She held the space and said, you can, just like my friend, like you got this. Like she held the space for all of those. But then there was other things like gardening, with earbuds of that Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd music that, brought me back to like digging holes and planting trees and saying like, hey, I'm strong. It's not that complicated, but day after day and month after month, because it was a period of about 7 years, um, it brought to fruition the healing. The hiking, of course, is there. Online phone meetings in recovery. At one time, I was a member of 5 different recovery programs. I needed recovery and healing all the time, because everything was so intense for me. So I went at my healing in an intense manner. And then it ends with me finding love. Sounds very cliche. And it is, except for one thing. Whenever I would hear people say like, oh, I'm in a healthy relationship, or, my partner is really healthy, I instantly heard in my mind, that's great, I'll never have that, because damaged people have damaged relationships. It was just literally cause and effect. I'm a damaged person. My intimacy was broken in 1,000 pieces. I will have a damaged, intimate relationship. And I was like, and that's okay, because look, I have all this other stuff over here. I have all this great stuff over here. Maybe I'll just just not have true love, and bam, in a very fun twist of events. Yeah. So that's how kind of it ends. But most people would like to know if I still solo travel after my life settled down. And of course I do. I'm leaving for England in 2 days for 10 days, 10 or 11 days. I'm not sure. I'll be traveling to Croatia after that, and then a couple places in Canada after that. So yeah.
So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I have one last question for you. So, with everything you've experienced, everything you've overcome, everything you've learned about life and yourself, what's the best one piece of advice you could give to another woman right now?
Believe in yourself. Start with a belief. Start with a belief and go from there. Because if you don't believe in yourself, you're not going to get there. And you're going to cry. It's going to hurt like hell. And it's going to be hard. But it's supposed to be, because then when you get through to the other side, you see how strong you are and that you can, because you believed in yourself.
Love that. Love that so much. Thank you so much, and enjoy your next travel experience.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me as a guest. I really enjoyed my time. This was a wonderful, fun conversation.
So, all right. Take care.